Moving on to the next talk, I'm delighted that Jardine Simpson is here. Jardine, as many of you know, is the Chief Executive Officer of Scottish Recovery Consortium, SRC, who are committed to making recovery more accessible to those experiencing addiction issues in Scotland. From my earliest days on the steering group of SHAAP, it became clear that Eric was passionate about letting people with lived experience and their families or whatever connection they have get their voice. And so I'm delighted that Jardine is going to be able to talk to us a little bit about the work that he and Eric have done together. Over to you, Jardine.
Thank you, Alistair. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Huge big thanks to Eric, and I also noticed that Felicity is joining us, and it's great to see you too, Felicity. I want to start off by talking about when I first encountered Eric back in 2016, when the great and the good were assembled in Edinburgh to discuss what would be next after the road to recovery. I think at that time we were discussing a potential national policy of keep, seek and treat. I remember hearing for the first time a rather well turned out chap in a three-piece suit, but rather angry, expressing his dismay at the lack of any joined up approach within the next big thing in drugs policy, having any linkage to the alcohol policy work that was ongoing, and SHAAP still plays such a seminal role in. That was Eric, and he spoke towards the end of the day so eloquently and so passionately, and that was my first meeting. And I was struck by how important it was for me as a human being to connect with Eric. That didn't happen on a regular basis until I became the Chief Executive of Scottish Recovery Consortium in 2018. And already by then, I realised that SHAAP were going to be so important for the agenda that as a new Chief Executive, I really wanted to roll out across Scottish Recovery Consortium and amongst people with lived experience of alcohol and drug addiction and recovery in Scotland. And Eric proved to be, and still is, one of my dearest friends in the drug and alcohol sector, and one of the few people that I really regard as maybe not a mentor, because I don't think he would like that term. It would make him rather uncomfortable. But he's certainly somebody whose approach I strive to emulate as a professional working in this sector. Because Eric, as a professional, never, ever lets that role eclipse his humanity, you know. And for me, that really enhances his practice in everything he does, and certainly in the work that he did with SHAAP. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But right from the very outset, that first initial meeting in Edinburgh, when I heard Eric speaking, I realised that here was somebody who, as a professional, understood the relevance of lived experience of alcohol dependency and recovery from that position. He understood, not as a supportive researcher, but he understood as a human being the power of that process of transcendent change that people in recovery go through. He understood it humanly and intrinsically. And probably more important for the sector, he was able to articulate it to his colleagues and to people with lived experience in a genuine, authentic and beneficial way. And really for me, that is the the lasting impression of SHAAP as an organisation. And I'd like to thank you, Derek, for keeping that course alive. For me, the importance of lived experience not being regarded as a cohort of individuals who can be utilised as service user involvement or researched at, and then data collected is hoovered back into an academic and professional and clinical system. And that system then interprets and articulates findings in a way that people with lived and living experience find very, very difficult to navigate. Eric was wholly committed to making the process of giving data an empowering one, a beneficial one to the people that he was asking to contribute to his research. And for me, that approach is encapsulated, and I'll follow Peter's lead here, is encapsulated by this document: stand up and tell me your story. For me, this is a seminal piece of work because my agenda as a person with lived experience and the purpose of Scottish Recovery Consortium to support, represent and connect is founded on facilitating a shift in how Scotland generates, analyses and utilises evidence, you know. As a population of around 5.5 million, we're small enough to make radical change happen in a global sense very quickly. And we're also big enough to be of global importance in terms of research. So for me to synthesize the idea of lived experience being regarded as another echelon of expertise and also having an equitable contribution to how we can redress or readdress the relationship between research and lived experience was so important and remains so important today. Eric, I believe, is a true supporter of lived experience because he understands what lived experience has to bring to the systematic approach to the reduction of harms around substances in Scotland. And he walks the walk alongside many others who talk the talk, you know. Eric's contribution in Stand Up and Tell Me Your Story. If you haven't read that document, please give it a read. And it does not matter. It does not matter why you're attending this seminar today. If you're a person with lived experience, if you're a family member, if you're a clinical professional, a third sector manager, a frontline worker, read that document. Because for the first time in my life or in my career over the last 15 years working all across Scotland, I found a piece of research that was addressed at all of us, not a small segment of the systematic approach, but all of us, you know. And Stand Up and Tell Me Your Story starts off very traditionally, very qualitative, very academically orientated in its language and its presentation. But organically, it evolves as a document into the qualitative experiences and inputs of people who have experienced the system, experienced how our society responds to some of its most vulnerable, but potentially most asset-based citizens, you know. And if you take the time to read through that document, and I encourage you to, because it's very, very readable, it's not a chore. Throughout that experience of reading that document, you gain an understanding and an insight, not only into how research can benefit from working with lived experience in a different way, but you also become exposed and part of a movement a movement of connectivity, a movement of values, not a movement of shifting resource from one place to another. Because it's all, what we are dealing with here is people with lived experience, and as clinical professionals and as researchers. Ultimately, we are dealing with human beings, and systematic approaches work well in terms of managing resource and coordinating capacity. But a systematic approach that governs individual practice stymies that transcendent process of change. And Eric Carlin understands that. And Eric Carlin has articulated that in documents like Stand Up and Tell Me Your Story. It's a seminal piece of work, you know. And isn't it interesting that here we are today, and some of you may have followed the news, and I know that Alistair appeared on Radio Scotland earlier talking about minimum unit pricing. Look at the work that SHAAP under Eric's leadership did around minimum unit pricing. And more than that, going beyond the systematic approach, actually engaging with Scotland's whole population, whether it be through Scottish women's football team, whether it be through his own personality as a human being, engaging the population in why it's important to understand the harms caused by the substance of alcohol to the human body and the human psyche.
Thanks very much, Jordan. That's a fantastic, very heartfelt a statement, really. And I'm very glad you highlighted Stand Up and Tell Your Story. It is indeed a great piece of work.